What happened to Alice?
She moved to accounting, couldn't handle your hours, and she prefers to be called Alan now, remember?
It can't go on like this, can it?
It can.
Portrayal and representation of gender and sexuality have undergone various changes in recent decades. Within this video essay, I'll be looking at the nuance of these changes and how the story follows a general positive trend, but is slightly more complicated than just, it has gone better over time. Within Gender and Media, the authors discuss Ian McIntosh's idea that queer theory emphasises a retreat from binary thinking. This quote gets at the heart of what a lot of queer experiences really stem from, and as well as this, academics such as the renowned Judith Butler have argued that gender is a stylised repetition of acts through time as early as 1988. This thinking embraces the idea that gender is not a confined fixed idea, but a societal construct that is always evolving. My point here is that within academia, the complexity of gender has been widely understood for well over 30 years and has been broadly accepted. This starts to raise the question of why media representation around gender has been so limited, and only in recent years are more authentic portrayals emerging. Within 20th century cinema, two films that feature trans-adjacent characters are Dressed to Kill from 1980 and The Silence of the Lambs from 1991. It's important to firstly note that in The Silence of the Lambs it is stated that Buffalo Bill is not trans, but instead a deranged serial killer who kills women in order to embody them. While both films have their own creative merit, in the conversation on LGBTQ+ representation, they fail miserably. Both films create and perpetuate the idea that somehow there is this link between being transgender and being compelled to be violent towards women. This narrative relates heavily to the idea of seeing trans identities as deviant or some sort of mental illness. What we can see within this representation, or lack thereof, can be described as symbolic annihilation. Symbolic annihilation presents people with implied messages about what it means to be a member of a culturally valued group versus a member of a socially disenfranchised group. These violent, psychotic portrayals of genderqueer identities establish the idea that this group is part of the socially disenfranchised. In this sense, the lack of authentic representation creates erasure and othering. It's now time to look at a much more recent example of representation to see what's changed. The 2015 film The Danish Girl was about the Danish painter Lily Elbe. In the 1930s, Lily Elbe underwent gender reassignment surgery, and the story of the film is about her journey of self-discovery and her love life. When the film released, the exploration of these themes was largely celebrated, and the film was a commercial and critical success. The representations themselves were also fairly respectful and celebrated the wonder of this queer love story. Okay, so what's my point here exactly? Well, despite a seemingly respectful representation and defiance in its support of queer identity, the film has been criticised for its casting. The main character of Lily was played by British actor Eddie Redmayne. Redmayne undertook the role with respect for the trans community, but it was, in his own words, a mistake. In some ways, all the praise of Redmayne's bravery for playing this role felt slightly misdirected when real trans people face such discrimination in their daily lives. When we look at representation, we need authenticity. It is pertinent to maintain respect within the representation, and the best way to do that is to directly offer those involved a seat at the table. Within the trans umbrella of identity, we can also look at non-binary identities. Non-binary identity is often misunderstood, and despite the general idea being an identity that exists outside of the gender binary, there are certain tropes that come up very often within media. Research in the article Representations of Young Non-Binary Characters in Mainstream Fiction found that their sample of fictional non-binary characters all had stories where non-binary identities serve as the central, almost sole element in their character construction and storyline. As well as this, almost all the depictions portrayed being non-binary as a rejection of feminine identity. Overall, singling any one of these representations out would not necessarily indicate an example of poor representation, as it may very accurately apply to many non-binary viewers. However, with all the characters having similar tropes and stories, we lose a lot of the nuance that makes non-binary identities appealing for many in the first place. This can then misinform people on what the experience and notion of such an identity truly means. An example that slightly breaks the mould is Mae Martin's Feel Good. Their character, a self-insert, talks explicitly about their struggles with gender identity, how it impacts their sexuality, but also a plethora of other aspects of their life, from romantic relationships, parental relationships, mental health and addiction. In Feel Good, we get a much more complex, rich sense of personal identity that makes space for confusion, but is also unapologetically genderqueer. Overall, with the journey these various examples take us on, I hope it has been clear that there is much complexity within the gender identity representation. In the late 20th century, harmful stereotypes were still being celebrated within mainstream Western cinema. Then, by 2010s, a more understanding approach was emerging, but fell short in terms of inclusion. And finally, today, we have this split between examples of real representations with depth and nuance that is also mirrored by a more generic and mainstream, slight misinterpretation of genderqueer identities.